Three months after Haiti's January the 12th earthquake, a large part of the population is still in need of housing, food and medical care. MSF has been working in the country for 19 years and will continue to provide Haitians with access to health care when the emergency phase ends, but it's not over yet. After the initial life-saving surgery and first aid for thousands of people, the teams developed and expanded their activities in secondary health care, psychological care and general medicine patient consultations. MSF has also distributed tents and basic supplies and has built latrines in makeshift camps.
The volume of the operation in Haiti corresponds to what has happened with this earthquake, and it can be translated into impressive figures. Today, after 3 months of activity, we have now taken in charge 92,000 patients. We have performed 5,000 surgical interventions. We are managing 7 hospitals, 6 rehabilitation centers. We have 1,200 hospitalization beds, meaning that more than 3,000 international and local staff are working today within MSF teams in Haiti.
1 million homeless people are sleeping in the streets or makeshift camps. The country's health service, which was already running on limited resources prior to the quake, has literally crumbled. International solidarity plays an important role, and major financial support was confirmed at the International Donors Meeting in New York. However, the population is in great need of immediate and effective short and medium-term solutions.
The expectation from the Asian population is really big at the moment. They need to have their concrete daily problem translated into actions. If the gap between the need of shelter, water and access to care remains important, this could lead to increasing frustration.
Faced with a still uncertain and fluctuating situation, MSF teams remain responsive. The organisation is committed to maintaining the level of care and assistance offered up to this point. The next transitional phase will pose major challenges for the organisation.
What remains unknown today is the way the health sector is going to be reorganized and set up in the future, whether the healthcare is going to remain free of charge or not, and how the displaced population is going to be relocated within the periphery of the city. MSF, on all these aspects, is willing to commit to mid-long-term activities in Port-au-Prince.
3 months after the earthquake, and with the rainy season threatening to worsen the already difficult living conditions of 1 million homeless people, Haiti is still faced by humanitarian needs on a vast scale.
They took off all my clothes and tied me up with my shoelaces. They demanded money. I gave them all the money I had. Then they hit me on the head with a rock and kicked me in the ribs, and they left me there without any money.
This man is from Zimbabwe. He was assaulted while trying to reach South Africa. Over these past few years, thousands of Zimbabwean migrants have sought to cross the border in an attempt to flee their country's economic crisis. They are easy prey for extremely violent gangs on both sides of the border.
If they don't have money, usually they also abuse sexually the migrants. So can be, of course, women and girls are the most vulnerable in these cases, but we have also a lot of cases of men obliged to have sex with other women in the same group.
Although South Africa's Department of Foreign Affairs announced that a new system would be set up to regularize the status of Zimbabwean migrants, they are still often refused entry into the country. Those who are not turned back at the border face a host of ordeals. They can be detained for days in crowded shelters while awaiting asylum, threatened constantly with arrest, or have no other choice but to sleep in the streets. Their health and safety are constantly at risk.
I got a lift hitchhiking and asked the driver to tell me when I reached my destination. When I told him that we'd got to where I wanted to go to, he told me that I wasn't in the right place. I didn't know the area well. He drove me to his house. When we got there, he removed my top by force and raped me.
Attacks and rapes committed against these undocumented migrants have continued to rise since the beginning of the year. Working on the outskirts of the town of Musina, MSF medical teams provide treatment to a growing number of wounded and traumatized Zimbabweans who have been stripped of all their possessions. MSF teams have started an assessment mission on the west coast of Mayotte Island. Every year, thousands of undocumented migrants venture out to sea to reach this French overseas collectivity, where they hope to live and work. Most come from the neighbouring island of Anjouan and have little or no access to health care.
A nurse told us that this could be an interesting location for us to work because there are a lot of undocumented people here. We wanted to go to Mongajou rather than Sada because there is a large police station in Sada and patients probably wouldn't go to see a doctor there.
4 days later, the MSF teams set up their clinic for the day. These people rarely visit a doctor for fear of being arrested and deported by the police, who are becoming increasingly repressive. Last year, nearly 20,000 people were sent back to Anjouan.
We see skin infections, upper and lower respiratory infections, and patients with chronic conditions such as high blood pressure, diabetes and asthma. Some have run out of treatment.
Cost is another obstacle. People who are not covered by the healthcare system, which includes undocumented migrants, now pay a minimum of €10 to be seen at a health centre. In the capital, Mamoudzou, MSF teams provide patient consultations in the Kaweni slum area, where inhabitants live in appalling hygiene conditions. Since the centre opened, the teams have provided 15,000 medical consultations. More than 95% of these patients were undocumented.
I was raped. For 5 days. 5 days. You cry. You plead with God, but no miracle saves you. You beg for death even, but death doesn't come.
Lisa left the Democratic Republic of Congo and headed for Morocco, hoping to make her way eventually into Europe. The majority of women migrants of sub-Saharan origin flee their homes in order to escape conflict and violence or forced marriages. During their long and difficult journey, however, they are particularly vulnerable to all kinds of abuse.
One of 3 of the migrant women which the teams of Médecins Sans Frontières told us that they had been victims of sexual violence, in many cases more than once. And many women are afraid and they don't want to talk to us about it. So we are really concerned that actually this number is much higher and could constitute a problem of alarming proportions.
Once in Morocco, an increasing number of migrants and asylum seekers find themselves at a dead end, making them even more vulnerable.
You cannot survive because there is no work for women here. There's only prostitution. And not all women agree to become a prostitute. That's why there are so many women suffering here.
Because the European Union countries have implemented more and more restrictive migration and asylum policies, many of the women find themselves blocked in Morocco for long periods of time. And there they live in very precarious conditions, but also because of their irregular status, face violence and abuse.
MSF teams see the physical and mental suffering of these migrant women and have gathered information and personal accounts so that the plight of these victims can be heard. On March 12, 2010, these activists, many of whom are HIV positive, gathered in New Delhi to protest in front of the Ministry of Commerce during negotiations between the Indian government and the European Union. India is the source of most of the generic drugs used in the developing world. It can only do this thanks to its flexible patent laws. But today, through a new free trade agreement, the European Union is seeking to impose new restrictions on Indian intellectual property law, posing a threat to the production and to the export of generic drugs to the developing world at affordable prices.
Here in Kenya, the government cannot afford to pay more money for ARTs, and therefore the current success of the program will severely be hampered.
If this trade agreement is passed, it could stop generic drugs from being registered and marketed, and the legal duration of patents would be extended. These changes would block competition and keep drugs at unaffordably high prices. The cost of treatment would increase all over the developing world.
If the generic drug can be stopped, like today, surely we can die. Because like me, I'm taking the drug B, and one of my child.
The agreement, which is to be finalised this year in Brussels, would have a direct impact on the well-being of millions of people living in developing countries. Médecins Sans Frontières treats 150,000 patients living with HIV/AIDS in its programmes worldwide. 80% of MSF's AIDS drugs come from India.